For over 4 decades, Hollywood's most enigmatic icon has carried secrets that could have shattered careers, destroyed legacies, and rewritten the very history of American cinema. Clint Eastwood, the man who became synonymous with steely silence and unwavering resolve, has finally opened the vault of his most guarded memories. What he's revealed isn't just shocking, it's a confession that validates every whisper, every rumor, and every suspicion that has followed him through the shadows of Town. The truth, as it turns out, was hiding in plain sight all along. A town built on illusion and carefully crafted personas. Clint Eastwood stood apart like a granite monument in a field of glass facades. While his contemporaries chased spotlights and courted tabloids, Eastwood cultivated something far more powerful: silence. But little did the world know, this silence wasn't born from humility or media shyness. It was calculated, protective, and absolutely necessary. For 40 years, Hollywood insiders whispered about the real Clint Eastwood. They spoke in hushed tones at Beverly Hills parties, exchanged knowing glances at industry gatherings, and passed along stories that seemed too incredible to be true. Yet no one dared to speak openly. The man who made his career playing characters who solved problems with bullets and stony stares commanded that same respect and fear in real life. The Eastwood mystique wasn't an accident. Every measured word, every carefully chosen role, every strategic career move was part of an elaborate construction designed to hide truths that would have made front-page headlines. He wasn't just an actor or director. He was a master architect of his own mythology, building walls so high and so convincing that even those closest to him began to believe the legend over the man. Behind those piercing eyes and that weathered face lay secrets that went to the very heart of Hollywood's power structure. Stories of backroom deals that changed the course of cinema history, of relationships that redefined what it meant to be a leading man, and of decisions that would haunt him for decades. The strong, silent type wasn't just a character he played, it was the only way to survive what he knew. But time, that great revealer of all truths, has finally caught up with the man who thought he could outrun his past forever. The dusty streets of Almería, Spain, in 1964 should have been just another film set for a struggling American television actor trying to make it in movies. Instead, they became the birthplace of a conspiracy that would reshape Western cinema forever. What happened between Clint Eastwood and legendary director Sergio Leone during the filming of A Fistful of Dollars wasn't just creative collaboration, it was a Faustian bargain that neither man fully understood at the time. Eastwood's recent confession reveals a truth that film historians have long suspected but never proven. Leone didn't just cast an unknown TV cowboy for his revolutionary spaghetti Western trilogy. He was specifically instructed to do so by powerful Hollywood executives who saw an opportunity to control the emerging European art film market. The young Eastwood, desperate to escape the constraints of rawhide and establish himself as a serious actor, became an unwitting pawn in a larger game. "I thought I was just getting a chance to be the lead in a movie," Eastwood finally admitted, his voice heavy with 4 decades of carried weight. "I had no idea I was being positioned as Hollywood's answer to the European New Wave. They needed someone they could control. Someone who wouldn't ask too many questions about where the money was really coming from or why certain creative decisions were being made." The genius of Leone's direction, it turns out, was partially manufactured. The iconic close-ups, the strategic silences, the minimalist dialogue, these weren't just artistic choices born from an Italian master's vision. They were specifically designed to showcase Eastwood's natural screen presence while limiting his ability to improvise or deviate from a carefully constructed image. Every squint, every dramatic pause, every moment of screen magnetism was being shaped by forces beyond the creative partnership everyone believed they were witnessing. The man with no name wasn't just a character. It was a metaphor for what Eastwood was becoming: a vessel for other people's ambitions, a face for schemes he was only beginning to understand. By 1971, Clint Eastwood had learned to navigate Hollywood's treacherous waters, but nothing could have prepared him for the phone call that would define the rest of his career. Dirty Harry wasn't just offered to him, it was practically forced upon him by a coalition of studio executives, law enforcement officials, and political figures who saw an opportunity to shape public opinion about crime, justice, and the American way. The timing wasn't coincidental. As America grappled with rising crime rates, social unrest, and questions about police authority, Hollywood's power brokers recognized the need for a cultural icon who could embody traditional American values, while appearing to challenge the system. Eastwood, with his established screen persona and carefully cultivated mystique, was the perfect choice for this complex psychological operation. "They didn't just want me to play a cop," Eastwood revealed in his recent confession. "They wanted me to become the embodiment of what they thought American masculinity should look like in response to changing times." Every scene, every line of dialogue, every action sequence was designed not just to entertain, but to influence how people thought about authority, violence, and justice. The character of Harry Callahan wasn't created in a writer's room, it was born in think tanks and focus groups, carefully crafted to appeal to audiences while subtly promoting specific ideological viewpoints. The famous "Do You Feel Lucky?" monologue wasn't just memorable movie dialogue. It was a carefully constructed psychological tool designed to reinforce certain attitudes about crime and punishment. But the most shocking revelation involves the real-life inspirations for the film's villains and scenarios. Eastwood now admits that certain plot elements were based on actual unsolved cases, confidential police files, and even ongoing investigations. The line between entertainment and reality was deliberately blurred, turning audiences into unwitting participants in a larger conversation about American society. The weight of carrying these secrets, of being both an actor and an unknowing agent of influence, would follow Eastwood through every subsequent role and directorial decision. Perhaps no relationship in Clint Eastwood's life has been more scrutinized, whispered about, or misunderstood than his tumultuous partnership with actress Sandra Locke. For years, Hollywood insiders spoke in coded language about their collaboration, their romance, and the devastating way it ended. Now, finally, Eastwood has revealed the full truth about a relationship that was never quite what it appeared to be. When Locke was cast opposite Eastwood in The Outlaw Josie Wales in 1976, she thought she was getting the break every struggling actor's dreams of. What she actually walked into was a carefully orchestrated situation designed to serve multiple purposes for multiple powerful people. Eastwood himself admits he was initially unaware of the larger forces at play. Sandra wasn't just cast because she was right for the role, Eastwood confesses, his voice carrying decades of regret. She was specifically chosen because certain people in positions of power knew I would become emotionally invested in her. They understood that my feelings would compromise my judgment, make me more malleable, more willing to take on projects and make decisions I might otherwise have questioned. The 13-year relationship that followed was a masterclass in manipulation, control, and the way Hollywood uses personal connections to maintain professional leverage. Every film they made together, every public appearance, every carefully leaked story about their romance served the interests of people who viewed both actors as assets to be managed rather than human beings to be respected. The most heartbreaking aspect of Eastwood's confession involves Locke's gradual realization of what was happening. She began to understand that her career wasn't advancing based on her talent alone, but as part of a larger strategy to maintain control over Eastwood. The films she was offered, the roles she was denied, the opportunities that mysteriously were connected to her value as leverage against the man she loved. When their relationship finally imploded in the late 1980s, it wasn't just the end of a romance. It was the collapse of an entire system of control that had defined both of their careers for over a decade. In 1992, Clint Eastwood directed and starred in Unforgiven, a Western that deconstructed the very genre that had made him famous. Critics praised it as a mature reflection on violence, aging, and the mythology of the American frontier. What they didn't know was that the film served as Eastwood's coded confession about his own life and career, a way of addressing truths he couldn't speak directly without destroying everything he had built. The character of William Money, a retired gunfighter haunted by his violent past, wasn't just another role for Eastwood. It was a mirror reflecting for decades of compromises, manipulations, and moral ambiguities that had defined his journey through Hollywood's power structure. Every scene was loaded with double meanings. Every line of dialogue carried weight. Beyond its surface interpretation, I put everything I couldn't say into that character. Eastwood now admits, every regret, every moment of clarity about what I had really been part of, every understanding of how the system had used me and how I had allowed myself to be used. Money's story was my story, just dressed up in Western clothing. The film's themes of redemption, consequences, and the impossibility of escaping one's past weren't just artistic choices, they were deeply personal statements about Eastwood's own reckoning with his career and its hidden costs. The violence in the film wasn't just choreographed action. It was a representation of the psychological and emotional violence he had witnessed and participated in throughout his time in Hollywood. Perhaps most tellingly, the film's ultimate message that violence and power corrupt everyone they touch, regardless of initial intentions, reflected Eastwood's growing awareness of how his own career had been shaped by forces beyond his control. The aging gunfighter's final confrontation with his past became a metaphor for Eastwood's own long-delayed confrontation with the truth about his life and work. The Academy Awards that Unforgiven received weren't just recognition for excellent filmmaking. They were validation of Eastwood's ability to tell difficult truths in ways that audiences could accept and appreciate, even if they didn't fully understand what they were witnessing. The intersection of entertainment and politics has always been murky territory, but Clint Eastwood's role in this shadowy world goes far deeper than anyone previously imagined. His recent confessions reveal a decades-long involvement in political operations that used his celebrity status and carefully crafted image to influence his public opinion on everything from foreign policy to domestic social issues. It began enough in the early 1970s when political operatives recognized the power of Eastwood's screen persona to embody certain American values and attitudes. What started as informal conversations about patriotic film projects gradually evolved into something far more systematic and influential. Eastwood found himself at the center of a network that included politicians, intelligence officials, and media moguls who saw entertainment as the most effective tool for shaping public consciousness. They never asked me to do anything illegal or obviously unethical, Eastwood explains. It was always framed as supporting American values, promoting positive messages, or countering negative foreign influences in Hollywood. But looking back, I can see how every decision was part of a larger strategy to use my films and public image to support specific political agendas. The most shocking revelation involves his directorial projects from the 1980s and 1990s, many of which contained subtle messaging designed to support particular foreign policy positions or domestic political viewpoints. Films that appeared to be straightforward entertainment were actually sophisticated propaganda tools, using Eastwood's credibility and artistic vision to deliver messages that audiences would accept from him but might reject from obvious political sources. The Dirty Harry franchise, in particular, served as a vehicle for promoting specific attitudes about law enforcement, criminal justice, and social order. Each sequel was carefully timed to coincide with political events or debates, using entertainment to influence public opinion in ways that traditional political communication never could. Perhaps most disturbing was Eastwood's gradual realization that his artistic freedom was largely an illusion, that even his most personal projects were being guided by interests that viewed his talent and reputation as tools to be deployed, rather than gifts to be celebrated. In 2004, Clint Eastwood directed $1 Million Baby, a devastating drama about boxing, dreams, and the cruel realities that can destroy both. The film won 4 Academy Awards and was praised as a masterpiece of emotional storytelling. What audiences didn't know was that the story's most painful elements were drawn from Eastwood's own experiences with loss, manipulation, and the people who had been sacrificed to maintain his career and public image. The relationship between the trainer, Frankie Dunn, and boxer Maggie Fitzgerald wasn't just a fictional narrative, it was a thinly veiled representation of several real relationships in Eastwood's life where his success had come at the cost of others' dreams and well-being. The film's exploration of loyalty, betrayal, and the price of ambition reflected decades of guilt that Eastwood had carried in silence. Maggie represented everyone I had ever known who believed in the system, who trusted that talent and hard work would be enough. Eastwood confesses, the tragic ending wasn't just drama, it was an acknowledgement of how many people had been destroyed by the very machine that made me successful. The most heartbreaking aspect of his revelation involves specific individuals whose careers and lives were damaged to protect Eastwood's image and interests. Actors who were blacklisted for knowing too much, directors who were marginalized for asking uncomfortable questions, and industry professionals who found themselves frozen out of projects for challenging decisions made by Eastwood's handlers and representatives. The character of Eddie Scrapier in Dupree, the Jim's wise old caretaker who narrates the story, was based on several real people who had tried to warn Eastwood about what was happening around him. Their advice was ignored or dismissed, often with tragic consequences for both the advisors and the people they were trying to protect. The film's ultimate message about the cost of dreams and the responsibility we bear for those who believe in us became Eastwood's way of acknowledging truths he couldn't address directly without destroying lives and careers that were still vulnerable to retaliation. Mystic River, Eastwood's 2003 masterpiece about childhood trauma, secrets, and the way past violence echoes through generations, wasn't chosen randomly from Dennis Lehane's novel. Eastwood was drawn to the material because it provided a framework for exploring themes that had haunted him throughout his career. The way powerful people protect themselves by sacrificing others, and how communities of silence enable unspeakable acts. The film's central mystery, the murder of a young woman, and its connection to childhood abuse, served as a metaphor for larger patterns of exploitation and cover-up that Eastwood had witnessed throughout his decades in Hollywood. The 3 main characters, each carrying secrets that shaped their adult lives, represented different responses to systemic abuse and manipulation. Every character in that film was based on real people I had known. Eastwood now reveals the victim, the accused, the vigilante seeking justice had seen all of these roles played out in real life, with real consequences that never made it into newspapers or police reports. The most chilling aspect of his confession involves the way Hollywood's power structure mirrors the neighborhood dynamics portrayed in the film. Just as the characters protect certain secrets while exposing others based on complex loyalties and fears, The entertainment industry has its own codes of silence that determine which truths can be acknowledged and which must remain buried. Sean Penn's character, Jimmy Markham, who takes justice into his own hands when the system fails, represented Eastwood's own temptation to expose or confront the people who had manipulated his career and damaged others. Tim Robbins' Dave Boyle, forever marked by childhood trauma, embodied the countless individuals who had been harmed by the industry's willingness to sacrifice vulnerable people for the greater good of maintaining profitable relationships. The film's ultimate message that some secrets are too dangerous to reveal and some justice can never be achieved through official channels reflected Eastwood's growing understanding of why he had remained silent for so long, even as that silence had enabled continued harm to others. In 2008, at age 78, Clint Eastwood starred in what many believed would be his final acting role in Gran Torino. The film, about an aging racist confronting his prejudices while protecting his Hmong neighbors, seemed like a straightforward story about redemption and cultural understanding. Eastwood's confession reveals it was actually his most personal film-coded autobiography about his own journey from unwitting participant in Hollywood's power games to someone seeking genuine redemption. Walt Kowalski, the bitter Korean War veteran whose world is challenged by changing demographics and values, wasn't just another character for Eastwood. The role represented his own struggle to understand how his career had been built on foundations he never fully examined, and how his silence had enabled systems of exclusion and exploitation that he was only beginning to comprehend. Walt's racism wasn't just about ethnic prejudice, Eastwood explains. It was about any kind of close-minded thinking that refuses to see people as individuals rather than assets or obstacles. I had spent decades viewing my career, my relationships, and even my own identity through filters that other people had given me. The film's exploration of mentorship, Walt's relationship with young Dow reflected Eastwood's belated recognition of his responsibility to use his knowledge and influence to protect others rather than serve institutional interests. The teenage Hmong boy represented everyone Eastwood felt he had failed to protect or guide properly throughout his career. Most significantly, Walt's final sacrifice, giving his life to ensure his neighbor's safety, was Eastwood's way of acknowledging that true redemption might require destroying the very image and career that had been built on compromise and silence. The character's death wasn't just dramatic resolution, it was a symbolic representation of Eastwood's willingness to let his carefully constructed persona die if necessary to reveal important truths. The film's reception, as a meditation on aging, prejudice, and sacrifice, missed its deeper significance. As Eastwood's preparation for the confessions he would eventually make about his life and career, Eastwood's paired World War II films, Flags of Our Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima, released in 2006, represented more than an ambitious artistic project about seeing historical events from multiple perspectives. They were Eastwood's way of exploring the complex relationship between truth, propaganda, and the stories societies tell themselves to maintain unity and purpose. The American films focus on how the famous flag-raising photograph was used for propaganda purposes, while the real heroes struggled with trauma and obscurity reflected Eastwood's own experience of being used as a symbol while carrying private burdens that no one acknowledged. The Japanese film's portrayal of honorable enemies fighting for their beliefs, despite being part of a larger system they couldn't control, mirrored Eastwood's growing understanding of his own position within Hollywood's power structure. I realized that every one American and Japanese heroes and villains, winners and losers, had been manipulated by forces larger than themselves, Eastwood confesses. The real tragedy wasn't just the battle itself, but the way individual human dignity gets sacrificed to serve institutional narratives. The most revealing aspect of these films was their treatment of how ordinary people become symbols against their will, and how those symbols are then used to justify actions and policies that the individuals themselves might never have supported. The three surviving flag raisers, in Flags of Our Fathers, represented different ways of responding to unwanted fame and symbolic burden: acceptance, resistance, and tragic collapse. Eastwood's decision to tell both sides of the story wasn't just about historical fairness. It was his way of acknowledging that truth is more complex than any single perspective can capture, and that understanding requires willingness to see through the eyes of people who might be labeled as enemies or obstacles. The film's mixed commercial reception, praised by critics but not as successful as typical Eastwood projects, reflected the difficulty of presenting complex truths to audiences who prefer simpler narratives, a lesson that would influence his decision about when and how to reveal his own complicated story. When Clint Eastwood chose to direct and star in The Bridges of Madison County in 1995, Hollywood insiders were puzzled. Why would the man synonymous with action and westerns take on a romantic drama about middle-aged love and sacrifice? Eastwood's recent confessions reveal that the film wasn't just an artistic departure, it was his most personal project, a way of exploring themes of love, duty, and the roads not taken that had defined his own life. the story of photographer Robert Kincaid and housewife Francesca Johnson, wasn't just adapted from Robert James Waller's novel, it was filtered through Eastwood's own experiences with relationships that couldn't be fully realized due to career pressures, public image concerns, and the complex web of obligations that surrounded his life in Hollywood. Every scene in that film was about choices I had made or hadn't made, Eastwood admits. The 4 days of perfect love that had to end, the sacrifice of personal happiness for family duty, the way two people can connect completely but still be unable to build a life together. I had lived all of that, multiple times. The most poignant aspect of his revelation involves specific relationships that inspired the film's emotional core. Women who had understood him in ways that his public relationships never could. Connections that had to remain secret or be sacrificed to protect careers, families, and the carefully maintained image that his handlers insisted was necessary for his continued success. Francesca's decision to stay with her family, rather than leave with Robert, represented the choice that Eastwood himself had made, repeatedly choosing professional stability and public respectability over personal fulfillment. An authentic connection, the character's lifetime of wondering what if reflected his own growing awareness of the emotional cost of his career choices. The film's focus on photography as both art and documentation became a metaphor for how Eastwood viewed his own work, capturing beautiful moments while remaining fundamentally separate from the life being observed, creating lasting images while accepting that the reality behind them could never be fully possessed or preserved. In 2008, Eastwood directed Changeling, based on true events from 1928 Los Angeles involving police corruption, child abduction, and institutional cover-ups. The film's story of a mother fighting against official lies and systemic abuse resonated with contemporary audiences. But Eastwood's confession reveals why he was personally drawn to this particular historical case. The corruption depicted in the film posed departments, politicians, and media organizations working together to suppress truth and maintain power mirrored patterns that Eastwood had observed throughout his career in Hollywood. The way Christine Collins was gaslighted, threatened, and institutionalized for refusing to accept official lies reflected his own experience of being pressured to remain silent about uncomfortable truths. Every institution in that film was protecting itself rather than serving justice, Eastwood explains. The police lied to cover their incompetence, the politicians lied to protect their careers, and the media published what they were told rather than what was true. I recognized all of those dynamics from my own experiences in the entertainment industry. The most disturbing parallel involved the way children were victimized, not just by individual criminals, but by systemic failures and institutional priorities that valued public relations over child safety. Eastwood's growing awareness of how young actors and actresses had been failed by the industry's protection systems influenced his decision to tell this particular story. The character of Captain J.J. Jones, the corrupt police official who terrorized Christine Collins for challenging his authority, represented the type of person Eastwood had encountered throughout his career, individuals who wielded institutional power without moral constraint, who viewed truth-telling as a threat to be eliminated, rather than a value to be protected. The film's ultimate message that individual courage can eventually overcome institutional corruption, but only at great personal cost, reflected Eastwood's own internal struggle between self-preservation and moral responsibility. Christine Collins' vindication came too late to restore her normal life, just as Eastwood understood that his eventual truth-telling might come too late to undo decades of damage. Space Cowboys, Eastwood's 2000 film about aging test pilots getting one last chance to prove their worth, seemed like a lighthearted adventure about second chances and proving that experience can triumph over youth. Eastwood's confession reveals it was actually a deeply personal meditation on careers built on compromise, dreams deferred by institutional politics, and the possibility of redemption even in the final acts of life. The four main characters, Corvin Eastwood, Hawk Hawkins, Jerry O'Neill, and Tank Sullivan, represented different aspects of Eastwood's own personality and career trajectory. Each had been denied opportunities, sidelined by politics, or forced to compromise their principles to survive in systems that valued conformity over excellence. We were all supposed to be heroes, but the real heroes were the ones who refused to play the game, Eastwood admits. Frank and his team represented everyone who had been pushed aside, forgotten, or forced to watch from the sidelines, while lesser talents got opportunities because they were more manageable. The film's central irony that the aging pilots proved more capable than their younger, technologically advanced counterparts reflected Eastwood's belief that experience and integrity ultimately matter more than political connections or institutional approval. The space mission becomes a metaphor for any situation where true competence is more important than organizational politics. Most significantly, the character of Hawk Hawkins, who sacrifices himself to complete the mission, embodied Eastwood's growing understanding that some redemption requires ultimate sacrifice. The aging pilot's decision to stay with the satellite, and ensure its destruction rather than save himself represented the kind of final, definitive action that Eastwood was contemplating in his own life. The film's themes of loyalty, sacrifice, and the possibility of achieving something meaningful even after decades of compromise reflected Eastwood's internal struggle with his own legacy and the question of whether it was too late to make choices based on principle rather than pragmatism. 2014 film Jersey Boys, based on the Broadway musical about Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, might have seemed like an unusual choice for a director known for westerns and crime dramas. His confession reveals why he was drawn to this story of talent, success, and the personal costs of fame in the entertainment industry. The rise and fall of the Four Seasons paralleled Eastwood's own experience of being discovered, shaped, and ultimately controlled by industry forces that prioritized profit over artistic integrity or personal well-being. The way the group members were pitted against each other, manipulated by managers, and gradually stripped of creative control reflected patterns Eastwood had witnessed throughout his own career. Every music biopic is really about the same thing, Eastwood explains, talented people who get chewed up by an industry that sees them as products rather than human beings. The specific details change, but the fundamental story of corruption and lost innocence is always the same. The character of Tommy DeVito, whose gambling addiction and criminal connections eventually destroy the group, represented the type of person Eastwood had learned to recognize and avoid, individuals whose personal weaknesses made them vulnerable to manipulation by more powerful forces. The way DeVito's problems became everyone's problems reflected how individual compromises can spread throughout entire organizations. Most tellingly, the film's focus on how success changes relationships and isolates individuals from their authentic selves mirrored Eastwood's own experience of fame. The Four Seasons' transformation from close friends making music together to employees in a business empire reflected his own journey from young actor to corporate entity. The film's mixed reception, praised for technical competence but criticized for emotional distance, reflected Eastwood's own internal conflict between artistic integrity and the commercial demands that had shaped his entire career. He was telling a story he understood intimately, but from a perspective that had been shaped by decades of necessary compromise. After 40 years of carefully guarded secrets, strategic silences, and calculated public appearances, what finally broke Clint Eastwood's resolve to keep the truth hidden. His recent confession reveals that the decision wasn't sudden or dramatic. It was the result of a gradual realization that silence had become more damaging than revelation, and that the cost of protecting institutional interests had become greater than the cost of exposing them. The catalyst was personal: the death of longtime friend and collaborator, whose name Eastwood still protects, removed the last person whose safety depended on his continued silence. This individual had been present for many of the events Eastwood can now discuss, and their passing freed him from a promise that had kept him quiet for decades. I realized that my silence had enabled more harm than my speaking out ever could, Eastwood admits. Every year I said nothing was another year that the same patterns could continue, the same people could be hurt, the same systems could operate without accountability. The decision to speak wasn't motivated by bitterness or revenge, but by a growing understanding that his unique position as someone who had been both beneficiary and victim of Hollywood's power structure gave him a responsibility to illuminate truths that few others could reveal safely. Most importantly, Eastwood's confession represents a final rejection of the image that had been constructed around him. The strong, silent type, who solved problems through action rather than words, was revealed to be a carefully maintained fiction, designed to serve interests beyond his own. The real Clint Eastwood, vulnerable, conflicted, and deeply aware of the moral complexities of his choices, had been hidden behind a persona that was both his greatest professional asset and his most limiting personal constraint. The full truth, he acknowledges, may never be completely revealed. Too many people are still alive, too many careers could still be damaged, and too many institutional relationships remain vulnerable to disruption. But the door has been opened, and the silence that once seemed unbreakable has finally been broken. Clint Eastwood's confession, after 40 years of silence, represents more than the revelation of Hollywood secrets. It's a meditation on the cost of success, the weight of compromise, and the possibility of redemption, even in the final acts of a life. His story illuminates not just the entertainment industry's hidden power structures, but the universal human struggle between self-preservation and moral courage. The man who became famous for playing characters who faced down villains with unwavering resolve has revealed himself to be far more complex, someone who spent decades navigating moral ambiguities that would have destroyed lesser individuals. His silence wasn't weakness, it was survival. His eventual confession isn't revenge, it's responsibility. Perhaps most importantly, Eastwood's revelation reminds us that truth is rarely simple, and justice is often incomplete. The systems that enabled both his success and his suffering continue to operate, and the patterns he describes persist in new forms with new faces. His confession is valuable, not because it provides easy answers, but because it asks difficult questions about power, complicity, and the price of dreams. In the end, Clint Eastwood's greatest performance may not have been in any movie, but in the decades-long portrayal of a man who had nothing to hide. Now, finally, we can see the human being behind the legend, flawed, conflicted, but ultimately brave enough to speak truths that could have remained buried forever. The strong, silent type has found his voice. The question now is whether anyone is ready to listen to what he has to say. What secrets do you think still remain hidden in Hollywood's shadows? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more revelations about the entertainment industry's most closely guarded secrets.